Hi everybody. Welcome to our channel, The Scary Tales. Our scary and horror stories are designed to send chills down your spine. Enjoy the spine-tingling stories thrill. Here's your horror stories about alone at work. 1. The late shift anomaly. Jason hated working late at the office. The company prided itself on being innovative, which mostly meant they forced employees to work late into the night. Jason, a junior data analyst, was often stuck in the quiet, sterile space long after everyone else had gone home. One Friday night, around 11:45 p.m., he noticed something strange. The computer screens on the far side of the office flickered. He assumed it was a power surge, but when he glanced at the glass-walled meeting room, he saw something that made his stomach turn. A figure sat in one of the chairs. It wasn't there a second ago. The figure had its back turned to Jason, hunched over a laptop. Jason squinted, trying to see who it was. Maybe another unlucky employee stuck working late. "Hey, you okay?" Jason called out. No response. The figure remained eerily still. Jason got up, walking cautiously toward the meeting room. He felt a creeping chill slither down his spine. The office was too quiet, only the soft hum of the AC and the buzz of the fluorescent lights filled the air. He reached the door and knocked lightly. "Hey, man." The figure spun around. It had no face. Jason stumbled back, a scream caught in his throat. The faceless figure stood, its featureless head tilting as if examining him. Then, the room went completely dark. Jason felt something rush past him. The hairs on his arms stood on end. He turned and sprinted toward his desk, grabbed his things, and bolted for the exit. When he glanced back, the meeting room was empty again. The following Monday, Jason asked his supervisor about security footage. The supervisor frowned. "There's no one on the cameras after 10 p.m. You were the only one here, Jason." But Jason knew what he had seen. And the next Friday, when he was forced to work late again, he swore he saw the faceless figure standing in the reflection of his monitor, watching him. 2. The basement office. Mallory had only been working at the publishing house for 2 weeks when she was assigned to the basement office. "The archives need organizing," her boss told her. "Just spend a few hours down there." She didn't mind at first. The basement was cool, the lights flickered occasionally, and there was an odd musty smell, but it was peaceful. Until she heard the whispering. At first, she thought it was the air vents carrying voices from upstairs, but when she listened closer, the whispers were unintelligible, and they were coming from inside the room. Mallory hesitated before looking around. Rows of filing cabinets stretched into the dimly lit corners of the basement. No one was there. She shook it off. "Stress," she told herself. "Just focus." But then the whispers came back, this time, closer. She spun around and gasped. One of the filing cabinets was open. She knew she hadn't touched it. Heart pounding, Mallory cautiously stepped toward it. Inside were old files, papers yellowed with age. Her eyes landed on a black and white photo clipped to one of the files. A woman in a pencil skirt and blouse stared up at the camera. But her face. Mallory blinked. The woman's face was blurred, smudged beyond recognition. A whisper slithered through the air. Mallory whipped around and saw a shadow in the corner. A figure. A woman. The lights flickered violently, and the whispering grew louder, filling her ears with a chorus of eerie voices. Mallory ran. She burst through the basement doors, panting, hands shaking. She told her boss what had happened, but he only sighed. "You saw her, didn't you?" Mallory's blood ran cold. "They say she worked here in the 50s. Went missing down in the basement," he continued. "No one ever found her body." Mallory never went back into that basement again. But sometimes, when she passed by the basement door, she swore she heard the whispering. 3. The men in the security room. Eric had been a night shift security guard for a few years, and nothing ever really scared him. Until the incident at Ravenwood Tech. The building was massive, with empty halls stretching in every direction. His shift was uneventful, mostly just checking cameras, walking rounds, and drinking bad coffee. But one night, around 2 a.m., something felt wrong. The security feed flickered, and for a split second, Eric saw movement in the security room, his room. He turned around. No one was there. Shaking it off, he kept watching the cameras. Then he saw it again. A figure, standing right behind him in the reflection of the monitors. Eric's breath caught. His hands turned ice cold. Slowly, he turned his head. The security room was empty. But the cameras. Eric's stomach churned. The cameras showed himself sitting at the desk. But behind him, in the footage, a tall man loomed. His face was distorted, his mouth too wide, his eyes hollow. Eric's real body was frozen. Then, the screen flickered, and the man in the footage turned his head toward the camera. The lights cut out. Eric bolted out of the security room, running down the halls, breath ragged. He didn't stop until he reached the exit. The next morning, he quit his job. A few months later, curiosity got the better of him. He reached out to a former coworker and asked about the security room. The coworker hesitated before responding. "Eric, after you left, we checked the old footage." There was a long pause. "There was never anyone else in the room with you." Eric never slept well after that. Every time he saw a reflection, he half expected to see that thing standing behind him. Waiting. Watching. Let me know if you want more stories like these. 4. The Janitor's Warning. Derek worked as an IT technician in a massive corporate office. Since his job required system updates and maintenance, he often worked late, long after everyone else had gone home. One night, around 1 a.m., he was finishing up when the janitor, an old man named Gus, approached him. "You should leave soon," Gus muttered, eyes darting toward the far end of the office floor. Derek chuckled. "Yeah, just a few more minutes." "No," Gus said, his voice more urgent. "You don't want to be here when it comes." Derek frowned. "What do you mean?" Gus sighed and leaned in. At exactly 1:17 a.m., the office isn't empty anymore. A chill ran through Derek's body. "What do you mean?" But Gus just shook his head and walked off, mumbling something under his breath. Derek ignored it. Old man superstition, he figured. He turned back to his screen. Then the lights flickered. He glanced at the clock. 1:16 a.m. The office felt different. The air felt heavy, charged. The low hum of the fluorescent lights sounded distorted, almost warbled. Then he heard it. A chair scraping against the floor. Slowly, he turned his head. One of the rolling office chairs was moving, on its own. His breath caught in his throat. Another chair slid out from a desk. Then another. A printer in the corner suddenly powered on, spitting out paper with nothing printed on it. Derek's heartbeat pounded in his ears. Then, from the far end of the office, he heard it. Bare feet slapping against the tile floor. Running. It was getting closer. Derek grabbed his bag and bolted, knocking over his chair in the process. He sprinted down the hall, past the break room, toward the exit. As he reached the door, he stole one last glance over his shoulder. A shadowy figure stood in the middle of the office. It had no features, no face, but it was watching him. Derek didn't come back to work the next day. Or ever again. 5. The elevator that skipped floors. Lena was used to working late. As an architect, she often stayed past midnight, sketching designs and finalizing blueprints. One night, around 2 a.m., she finally decided to head home. The office was empty, save for the dull hum of the vending machines. She pressed the elevator button. It dinged, and the doors slid open. She stepped inside and hit L for the lobby. The elevator started descending. Then, without warning, it stopped. The display read B3. The doors opened. Lena's stomach tightened. Her building didn't have a B3. The space beyond the doors was pitch black. A damp, rotting smell wafted in. The air inside the elevator turned icy. Then, the sound of footsteps. Something was in the darkness, walking toward her. The lights in the elevator flickered violently. The footsteps grew faster, closer. Lena slammed the closed doors button, jabbing at it frantically. The doors didn't move. Then she saw it. A shape, tall and thin, barely visible in the shadows. Its head twitched unnaturally, its long fingers scraping the floor. Lena screamed. The doors suddenly slammed shut, and the elevator jerked violently. It ascended at breakneck speed before stopping at the lobby. She ran out, panting, tears in her eyes. The next morning, she asked security about B3. The guard frowned. There is no B3. The lowest we go is B2 for storage. Lena didn't argue. But she took the stairs every night after that. 6. The men who wasn't there. Carla worked at a 24-hour call center. It wasn't exciting, but it paid well. Her shift ended at 3 a.m., and by then, the place was mostly deserted. One night, as she was wrapping up, she noticed something odd. A man was sitting at one of the cubicles near the back. She had never seen him before. He wore a wrinkled button-up shirt and sat completely still, his head tilted downward. Carla frowned. Was someone else working late? She got up and walked over. "Hey, you okay?" The man didn't move. She tapped on the cubicle wall. "Hey." The man vanished. Carla staggered back, her breath caught in her throat. The chair was empty. No one had been there. Her heart pounded as she backed away. Then her phone rang. Slowly, she picked it up. "Hello." A deep, rasping voice whispered. "I saw you." Carla slammed the phone down and ran out of the building. The next morning, she asked the manager about the call logs. There were no calls made to her phone at that time. But when they reviewed the security footage, they saw Carla standing at the cubicle, talking to no one. Carla quit that same week. But sometimes, when she passed by the building late at night, she swore she saw a shadow in the window. 7. The wrong reflection. Michael worked the night shift at a high-end jewelry store. His job was simple: watch the security cameras and make sure no one broke in. The store had glass display cases everywhere, making the place feel bigger than it was. One night, around 2:30 a.m., Michael noticed something odd. The cameras showed a reflection in one of the glass cases. It looked like a person standing near the entrance. But when he checked the live feed of the entrance itself, no one was there. A cold chill spread down his back. He turned toward the showroom. From his small security office, he could see the main floor through a large one-way mirror. It should have been empty, but it wasn't. A figure stood in front of one of the display cases. Michael's breath caught. He turned back to the monitors. On the security screen, the figure's reflection was still visible, but not its actual body. It was as if it only existed in the glass. Michael stood up slowly, his heart pounding. The figure turned its head toward him. His own reflection remained still, but the thing in the glass was looking at him. The lights in the showroom flickered, and the sound of glass cracking filled the room. Michael bolted out of the security office and straight for the exit. As he reached the door, he made the mistake of glancing at the nearest display case. His reflection was still standing there, and it was smiling. 8. The 3 a.m. call. Jordan worked as a night receptionist at a law firm. His job was mostly answering phones, sorting mail, and making sure the building didn't burn down. One night, at exactly 3 a.m., the phone rang. He answered out of habit. "Thank you for calling Foster Williams. How can I help you?" Silence. Then, a whisper, "Let me in." Jordan's skin crawled. "Excuse me." The voice came again, this time a little louder. "Let me in." He checked the caller ID. The number was 0000000000. His gut told him to hang up. He reached for the button, but before he could press it, the whisper came back, this time, right in his ear. "I'm already inside." Jordan spun around. The lobby was empty. The glass doors were locked. The elevators were still on the top floor. Then the line went dead. Shaking, he checked the security cameras. In the footage, a tall, dark figure stood right behind him. But when he turned around again, there was nothing there. He quit the next day. 9. The archive room that didn't exist. Vanessa worked as a librarian at a university, often staying late to catalog new books. The library was old, filled with twisting corridors and rooms that hadn't been used in decades. One night, she was working on the 3rd floor when she found a door she had never noticed before. It was labeled Archives 3B. That was strange. She knew for a fact there were only 2 archive rooms. Curious, she pushed open the heavy door. The room was massive, much larger than the building's layout should have allowed. Shelves stretched into the darkness, lined with books and boxes covered in dust. She stepped inside, brushing her fingers over the nearest shelf. The books had no titles, no labels. Then, she heard breathing. Slow, shallow, right behind her. Vanessa turned, but no one was there. The air grew thick, heavy, like she was standing in a room with something that shouldn't exist. Then she saw the footprints. Dust on the floor shifted, as if something, was walking toward her. But there was no one there. The lights flickered, and a whisper slithered through the air. "You don't belong here." Vanessa ran. She burst through the door and slammed it behind her, heart pounding. The next day, she told her supervisor about the room. The woman frowned. "What room?" Vanessa led her to the spot, but the door was gone. Only a blank wall remained. She never went looking for it again. But sometimes, late at night, she swore she heard a door creak open somewhere in the library. And the whisper, calling her name. "Want even more? I can keep them coming." 10. The office that disappeared. Martin worked for a small marketing firm, and he often stayed late to finish projects. The office was on the 12th floor of an old building downtown, and at night, it was completely silent. One evening, around 11 p.m., he went to the break room for coffee. When he returned, something felt off. The lights in the hallway seemed dimmer. The air felt thick, almost suffocating. When he reached his desk, his computer was gone. His chair was missing. Even the framed photos on his desk had vanished. Confused, he looked around. All the desks were empty. No computers, no chairs, no signs that anyone had ever worked there. His heart started pounding. He walked to his manager's office, but the door was missing. In fact, all the office doors were gone. The walls were smooth, featureless. Panic set in. He grabbed his phone to call for help, no signal. Then he heard a whisper behind him. A soft, raspy voice, "You shouldn't be here." He spun around, but the office was still empty. Martin ran for the elevator. He jabbed the button frantically, his hands shaking. The doors finally opened, and he jumped inside, slamming the ground floor button. The elevator started moving. As it descended, he glanced at the mirrored walls, and saw the office exactly as it was before. fully furnished, people working at their desks, his chair, his computer, his photos, right where they should be. But none of them looked at the elevator. Except for one person. A figure standing where he had been sitting. It turned its head slowly, locking eyes with him. The doors shut before he could see its face. When Martin returned the next morning, everything was normal. His desk was there. His co-workers were chatting like always. But he never stayed late again. 11. The store's last customer. Rachel worked at a convenience store on the night shift. It was usually quiet, except for the occasional late-night customer. One night, at 2:45 a.m., a man walked in. He was strange. His suit was old-fashioned, his skin pale, his eyes dark and sunken. He moved slowly, deliberately, like he was walking through water. "Can I help you?" Rachel asked. The man didn't answer. He just stared. She felt a deep unease, but she forced a smile. "Sir, do you need something?" Still, no answer. Then, slowly, he lifted a finger and pointed at the security camera screen behind her. Rachel turned to look. The store's cameras showed 4 different angles of the building, but the man wasn't on any of them. A chill crawled up her spine. She turned back to the counter. He was gone. The store was empty. The doors hadn't opened. There was nowhere he could have gone. Rachel replayed the footage. The doors never moved. The man had never entered. And yet she had spoken to him. She quit a week later. But sometimes, when she passed by the store late at night, she saw a dark figure standing outside. Watching. 12. The factory worker who never left. Daniel worked in an old factory that produced metal parts. The place had been around for decades, and the night shifts were long and lonely. One night, while doing his usual rounds, he saw someone standing near the conveyor belts. It was a man wearing a faded work uniform. Daniel didn't recognize him, which was odd. He knew everyone on the night shift. "Hey," Daniel called out. "You okay?" The man didn't answer. Daniel walked closer. The man's face was blurred. Not in shadow, not obscured, just wrong. Like a smudged photo. Daniel stepped back. "Who are you?" The lights above flickered, and the conveyor belt suddenly roared to life. The machines, which had been shut down for the night, began moving on their own. Daniel turned back, but the man was gone. Shaken, he ran to the control room. "Did someone just come in?" he asked the supervisor. The older man looked pale. "You saw him, didn't you?" Daniel hesitated. "Saw who?" The supervisor sighed. "Years ago, a worker died on the night shift. Got caught in the machinery." Daniel's blood turned cold. "The thing is," the supervisor continued, "the cameras always show someone walking the floor at night." Daniel checked the footage. There he was, himself. Talking to no one. Daniel quit that same night. But the machines still turned on at random. And workers still reported seeing someone standing by the conveyor belt. The end.